Well, you're at the right place. This is probably the most complete collection of Cherokee neutral land documents around, except for the National Archives. Ella and Patty and all these people who put this together did a wonderful job.
What was the question?
Is anybody here descended from a settler that settled on the neutral land from, say, 1835 to 1866?
Oh, mine's not that early. Mine's
Okay,
1900.
okay.
My grandpa was on, my grandpa spent the first 10 years of his life, he was born in 1889, and his family had settled up in, by Hiawatha,
Okay.
but it was the Kickapoo
Okay.
neutral land rather than.
Right. Okay. And no Cherokees either, huh? Okay. Up near Cato, you've seen a lot of people who live up there who are descended from the early settlers. I've been doing research on the Cherokee neutral land for the last couple of years. So I'm focusing on the period that it was owned by the Cherokees. So that would be 1835 to 1866. And we'll talk a little bit about after it was ceded back to the government. Originally, the Cherokee neutral land was, in order to start talking about that, we need to talk about the treaties with the Indians, okay? And the area that was the Cherokee neutral land, you can see on this. There we go. Better. This is a map of the Cherokee neutral land circa around 1860. And it comprised almost all of Cherokee County, all of Crawford County, and 6 miles of Bourbon County. It was 50 miles north to south, 25 east to west. Okay. This was in 1825. The Osage Indians entered into a treaty with the United States government, and they give up their land in mostly what was Missouri, Arkansas, and part of Oklahoma for basically what was the lower part of Kansas. So it would be right here. This would be the southeast corner of Kansas. Okay. And this would be the Osage land here. And what they did was they left an empty area between Missouri and the Osages. And that became the neutral land. People say it was a no man's land where nobody was allowed to go. That isn't entirely true. It was, I think, probably the easiest way to think about it is a buffer zone. It was just an empty area. The Osages owned land here. The settlers, the white settlers, were over here, and they could get land claims and claim preemption and get land. But in the middle here, what was to become the neutral land, it was government land, but nobody could claim preemption, and nobody could gain title to any land. William Clark of Lewis and Clark, he was a superintendent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in St. Louis. Anyway, he negotiated that treaty with the Osages, and he said this area was basically to keep them apart, the settlers from the Indians, to keep their cattle apart, and to kind of discourage liquor flowing into the Osage land. Of course, it didn't work because it was only 25 miles across.
Of course.
Okay, so in 1835, the Cherokees entered into a treaty with the U.S. government. They gave up all their land in southeast Kansas for an equal amount in what's now northeast Oklahoma. and they agreed to move out here, which led to the 1848, no, 1838-39 Trail of Tears. Okay, and as many as 700, a minimum of 700 Indians died during that migration. During the 1835 treaty, they also purchased the neutral land. They got $5 million for their land in the southeast U.S. and for $500,000, they bought 800,000 acres in what was to become the neutral land. Okay. And they bought that in fee simple, which means they owned the land, they had a patent to the land, and nobody could take it from them. You know, often you hear things, well, they didn't really own it, you know, and this kind of thing. A lot of these, there's a lot of misconceptions about the neutral land. A lot of them come about right after it was sold in 1866 by the settlers who wanted to cancel that sale so they could get preemption or Homestead Act land. But they came up with quite a few whoppers. So that's where a lot of the misconceptions about the neutral land come from. Okay. So, who was on the neutral land? Well, there's a lot of a misconception that the Cherokees didn't even use it. Well, there are about at least 300 on there. Most of them were in the Spring River area. Some are over here by Chitopa, and they mixed with the whites and the Osage on that side of the Neosho River. And there were also some up near here, near what's now called Arcadia, Hathaway. Okay. Most of these settlers, particularly in the Spring River area, they were of mixed blood. You know, for David M. Harlan, for instance, he was a quarter Cherokee. But they're all full members of the Cherokee Nation. There wasn't any racial purity test or anything. So they had full voting rights. And David M. Harlan, he's an interesting guy, and he's not too well known around here. But he kind of bridged both worlds, between the white settler world and the Cherokee world. He was a quarter Cherokee. He lived, let's see, he lived right near Lowell, okay? And, oh, where's my thing? Oh, here, my cheat sheet. David M. Harlan, Spring River near Baxter Springs. Okay. Another Indian here, John Rogers, lived near Lowell. He had a mansion. A lot of these people owned slaves. There was also Richard and George Fields, also near Lowell. Dennis Wolfe, also near Lowell. And they came here in the late 1830s and early 1840s. Let's see. Oh. We were just talking about the Treaty of 1835. I mentioned that they bought the land. Okay. The federal government also agreed to protect them from intruders. For instance, white settlers who wanted to move onto the land. And that was a common treaty requirement at that time. Of course, it never was really fulfilled, but we'll get into that later. And another provision of the treaty was that the borders of the neutral land or the Cherokee Nation would never be encompassed by any state borders or county borders. And that went away real quick, too. Okay. Settlers, the white settlers who came here. If you were a white settler and you came here between 1835 and 1866, you were trespassing. Didn't stop anybody, but that was legally what it was. And settlers came here in the hopes of preemption. Does anybody know what preemption is? Okay. Preemption. Preemption is a settler was entitled to 160 acres on public land. So they would have to go to that public land, stake out a claim, register with the land office, and then they would have to pay, was it $1.25 an acre, or at the assessed value. Okay, so, but there were some requirements. First, the land had to be surveyed into sections. Also, it couldn't be Indian land unless that land had been ceded back to the government. Okay, so those were the requirements. As we'll see, nobody paid attention to those requirements except the Indians, the President of the United States, and Department of Interior and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Everybody else was kind of, well, we'll just look the other way. That was manifest destiny back then. Settlers. Settlers lived kind of intermingled in here with the Cherokees near Lowell. Up and down all of the creeks, Cow Creek, Lightning Creek, also along the Neosho River. I have this labeled as Matthews Settlement and Lyles Settlement. These are later become known as Oswego and Chetopa, okay? But in 1860, I can't find any evidence that they were called those names. So that's why I refer to them like that. Two main roads in the neutral land was the old military road, which went from Leavenworth to Fort Gibson in Indian Territory, and the Mission Road from Osage Mission, which is now St. Paul, right? Yeah, St. Paul, and it went down to Spring River area and over to Missouri. Let's see, Cato, the northern area, Drywood. We call these Drywood settlements, and this was the largest area. It was kind of a disputed area, and I'll get into that a little later. Okay, where are we now? Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854. That's the act that formed Kansas Territory and Nebraska Territory. And in that act, they guaranteed that the boundaries would not include the Indian reserves. But of course, that immediately was violated. Yeah. Let's see. I can show you. I'm not sure a lot of you are familiar with all the Indian reserves in Kansas. I think that comes as a surprise to a lot of people. Let's see here. Here we go. These are all the Indian reserves starting in 1854. So you can see almost all of the eastern Kansas was Indian reserves. And immediately, the borders were violated. And what would happen is settlers would come in hoping for preemption, and the territory would encourage them to come, look the other way, they were violating any laws. Federal government would look the other way, all except for the president. The president cared because he had treaty powers, and if those treaties were violated, he didn't look very good. Also, if the Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Affairs, that was their job to make sure that those treaties were enforced. But that's just the way it was back then, settlers didn't have it easy either. You know, when we get to the Civil War, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, they had a really hard time. Oh, preemption. One other thing about preemption is that the claims were often bought and sold, often by high officials, politicians. Fort Scott was a big area for buying and selling claims, even though those claims were on Indian land. Okay, also what happened with the Nebraska, when Kansas became a territory, is you had mass immigration from the west, from the east. There were a lot of people moving to the United States from Europe. They were looking for land and space, and the west is where they went. You know, so that's how that. Beginning in about 1851, and certainly by 1854, the Cherokees were looking to sell the neutral land. They wanted to sell it because they needed money to pay for the expenses of putting together a government and also for schools. But they weren't able to sell it till about 1866 because the government the legislature didn't want to appropriate funds. They had Cherokee factions that wanted to sell and that didn't want to sell, or were arguing about how they wanted to divide up the money. So that went on quite a bit. I don't think they had any trouble with settlers per se, compared to a lot of the other reservations. There seems to have been relatively little violence against the Indians. That isn't the same in all the reservations, but yeah, so they pretty much got along, and the Indians in Spring River area, they were part white, and they even wanted to become citizens. So it's not a simple subject. You know, it's not a black and white subject. People like David Harlan often played both sides at once. He could pass for white. He could even register to vote. If you're an Indian, you had to accept, adopt white man's ways, and then you could vote. So he really kind of was a conduit between the neutral land Cherokees and the white settlers and the government, especially the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Let's see. So we come to the settler removal of 1860. Anybody here heard of that?
What was it?
The settler removal of 1860? Nobody talks about it too much. Well, finally, after about 4 or 5 years, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had tried to get the settlers off. Well, they weren't moving anywhere. President Pierce authorized their removal, but it didn't happen. And then Buchanan did. But unfortunately, it was an election year, 1860. So that kind of complicated things. But the Cherokees, they were fed up. You know, they had been complaining about this for years, and they were still trying to negotiate a sale. And they convinced the government to authorize the use of force to get rid of the settlers. So in late 1859, Agent Robert J. Cohort and Captain Samuel Sturgis were authorized to remove the settlers. Sturgis was given 2 companies of cavalry and a company of light artillery to remove the settlers. But luckily, they only used a detachment of 50 cavalry. They started at Spring River. If the settlers agreed, they would move them by wagon to Fort Scott. If not, they would burn their cabins. So they started here, burned a cabin just at the intersection of Cow Creek and Spring River. Moved up to near where Pittsburgh is today. Burned some more houses there. Moved over to the Lightning Creek settlements. Burned more. And then moved up to Cato area. Okay. This was an area known as the 8 Mile Strip. And it was kind of a disputed area. The settlers claimed they were on New York Indian Reserve land, which was expected to be ceded to the government and open to preemption that year. So they wanted to be on that land very badly. But they weren't. And they found out they weren't in 1859. The settler, by 1860, they had been told that they needed to leave, but they refused. And by the time the cavalry came up here, the settlers were ready for them. So they were, you're not gonna run us off, or we'll fight to the death. That kind of thing. And they gave their reasons, and we spent a lot of money, and we did this in good faith, and government officials told us we could be there. There was some truth to some of this and no truth to some of it, But eventually they were allowed to stay. So they won. And I can go into a long thing about 8 Mile Strip, and this is Calhoun. He was the original surveyor, or surveyor general for Kansas Territory. And he actually moved this line 8 miles down. So it was actually on official maps. But he did it, either did it out of sheer ignorance or he did it fraudulently. And judging by his past actions in the Miami Reserve, which was farther up, and the New York Reserve, he had opened them to preemption. He had surveyed them all illegally. And the Washington wasn't happy. So the Drywood settlers got to stay, and then the Civil War started. Well, almost all of the superintendents and agents, Indian agents in Kansas, defected to the Confederacy. And then the fun starts. One of the worst things the Cherokees did was they signed a Treaty of Allegiance with the Confederates, and that was going to come back to haunt them later, in just a few years actually. So beginning of the Civil War, everybody's heard of John Matthews from Oswego? Okay. Well, he got up a raiding party of Cherokees, Osages, and white settlers from what's now Oswego, and started chasing out settlers off the neutral land, particularly if they were quote unquote abolitionists. Okay. So he did 2 raids, both up Lightning Creek. In 1861, he killed his forces killed 4 people and drove 60 families out. Matthews had a force of about 200. And on the second attack, he had about 300 men under him. And according to the Fort Scott paper, he drove out just about every settler, or at least every pro-Union settler off the neutral land. Okay. And then after that, there was a raid at Humboldt, which was on the New York Indian Reserve. And actually, it was a raid by Captain Livingston, but Matthews was implicated. The town was looted. Nobody was killed, luckily. I think one house was burned. So General Blunt went after Matthews, chased him down and killed him down here by Chitopa. There's a lot of controversy about Matthews. Some say he was really a good guy, but he was known to recruit for the Confederacy. The U.S. was at war, and he did have an order on him to recruit settlers and Indians. So.
His well is in Oswego, right?
Yeah.
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 With the marker and.
Oh, yeah, really? There's a marker there? Okay. In late 1861, has anybody heard of Stand Watie? He was the am I running out? Moving back and forth.
I'm chasing you
Sorry.
now, buddy. I get you.
Sorry. He was a general for the Confederacy and the Cherokees. He was a Cherokee. And war during that time was guerrilla warfare. Confederates would come in, loot, kill, and chase out settlers, and then the Union would come in, figuring out that any settler who was left had to be pro-Confederate, and they'd attack them. And they'd go back and forth until the neutral land was empty of settlers, except for up near here, because the drywood area was near Fort Scott. So it was. It became hell. It really did. One writer who had traveled through the neutral land right after the war said that he didn't see a single soul, but only the chimneys of burnt out cabins. So that's how bad it got. But anyway, Stan Watie came with the 3rd Regiment of the Texas Cavalry and drove more settlers out. And stopped only when they got up to about here, because then they were going to have to deal with Fort Scott. The other thing that happened with the Civil War was Indian refugees. In the Cherokee Nation, there were Indians who were for the Confederacy and Indians who were for the Union. And they were at each other's throats right away, burning each other's farms, killing each other. Also, the Creek Indians was Pothleahola was pro-Union, and of course he fought with the Confederates, and they chased them all the way up to Leroy, Kansas, in what turned into basically a death march. One of the more tragic things about these refugees is a lot of this happened during winter. So they, in fleeing to Kansas, they froze to death, starved to death, or or died of disease. Many of them came to Camp Drywood. Many of the Cherokees came to Camp Drywood, which we don't know exactly where it was. But it's probably somewhere near around Cato. And 1,700 came, and 3 months later, 700 had either died or gone back to the Cherokee Nation, which wasn't a good prospect for them, since they're pro-Union. So it got pretty ugly. It got really ugly. And the Union didn't really have the resources to take care of them, and they wanted them to get them back to what's now Oklahoma as soon as they could. I don't want to go into too much detail. I mean, I could go on and on this. Okay, the war's over. 1866. Finally, it's time to sell the neutral land. So the Cherokees are in a really weak position. They allied with the Confederates. Now they have to do a treaty with the Union. The only thing that saved them is a lot of Cherokees fought for the Union. A lot of neutral land Cherokees fought for the Union, as well as settlers. So they came up with here were the negotiating points for the federal government. They wanted the formation of a central government in Indian Territory for all Indian tribes. In other words, they wanted to move all the Indians from Kansas to Oklahoma Territory, or to Indian Territory. Slavery was to be abolished. It's a pretty no-brainer, you know. Indians were to move to Indian Territory and cede their lands in Kansas. Tribes in Indian Territory were to provide land for Kansas Indians, but they would be compensated for that land. And the tribes in Kansas were to be made to understand that the federal government had neither the ability or desire to prevent settlement on Indian land, and that resettlement would be to their best interest. So anyway, in the Treaty of 1866, at least concerning the neutral land, say the Cherokees ceded the neutral land to the federal government in trust. That means the federal government would sell it for them. Okay. And there were two ways that the federal government was going to dispose of the neutral land. According to this treaty, they were able to sell it. They would be able to sell it in one whole piece, you know, all together to one person. With the settlers who had been there earlier, they would have preemption claims. They could claim preemption. The Indians, or the settlers, would get 160 acres and have to pay whatever the assessed value was. There were $50 claimants that were able to buy less than 160 acres. And the Cherokees that were on the neutral land would get 320 acres, but would have to give up their membership of in the Cherokee Nation. Okay. So they did that. There were 1,300 claimants for preemption. So that was 1,300 heads of family. That's quite a few people. And yeah.
Do we have a list of the names of?
Yes, we do.
that got those?
They're in that book sitting right there.
Just a second, we'll get to that, because that's good stuff. And the Indians, there were only 22 claimants. If you're researching the neutral land, and if you want to learn about an ancestor or somebody who claimed preemption, nobody in the neutral land got land through the Homestead Act. So it's something a lot of people like to believe, but it wasn't true. And if you think about why it wasn't done through the Homestead Act, is the Cherokees ceded that land for the government to sell for them. They didn't want to give it away, which is what the Homestead Act would have done. You know, in the Homestead Act, if you farmed and developed your land for 5 years, you got the land for free. Okay. But you could say that the settlers here were homesteaders, because the other definition of homestead or homesteader is that you develop undeveloped land for agricultural purposes. So yeah, they were homesteaders. You could say that. They didn't acquire their land through the Homestead Act. They acquired it through preemption. Tabular schedules. We have the 1860 census for the neutral land. Okay, this is mostly white settlers. This is mostly kind of a voter's roll, pretty much. But it's pretty useful. But what you want to, if you're researching a settler who got their land through preemption, that would have been between 1866 and 1870. You're going to want to go to the tabular schedules. And what this is a list of all preemption claims and all Indian claims and all $50 claims. And I've listed it by alphabetical and by township and range. You can get township and range maps off the internet. It'll give you a good idea. And we also have some here, I believe.
Yeah, it's right, it's this other book here.
Yeah.
That we have taken and indexed all the.
Oh, yes, and Ella and Patty have taken on, in order to get preemption, you had to file an affidavit. And you had, somebody close to you had to sign it, affirming that, yeah, you actually settled there. And it would tell you about, it listed your improvements. Improvements meant developed agricultural land, like say you had 40 acres under cultivation, whether you had fences, whether you had a cabin, that kind of thing. It'll tell you that. Unfortunately, it didn't tell you when they came, unless your claim was disputed. And then you can get a lot of information that way. But Ella has a whole file cabinet of this affidavits. These are also available on the National Archives on the internet. All this stuff's on the internet now almost. And I think almost all of the neutral land stuff is on the internet. You just have to be good at reading bad handwriting and figuring out the old script and some weird phrasing. Tabular schedules include last name, first name, value of the acreage, township and range, subdivision, section, land area, value, number of the case. There's quite a bit of information here. Whether it was affirmed or denied. There's all kinds, Ella has all kinds of information here. Okay. Remember I said that Treaty 1866 said that all the land could be sold to one person? Well, it was, and the settlers weren't happy. It was James F. Joy was a Chicago, I guess you'd call him a Detroit railroad tycoon. And he bought the entire neutral land, minus what went to the Indians and the preemptors. And this meant that anybody who came after the treaty was signed in 1866 had to buy it from him. So there would be no regular preemption. He could charge whatever he wanted. And so they complained to the government because they wanted to overturn the sale, because they wanted either preemption rights or Homestead Act rights. But they didn't get them. Went all the way to the Supreme Court, and James F. Joy won. So, but in the meantime, they formed the Neutral Land League, the Land League they call it. And they started by beating up the surveyors, burning down the Girard newspaper, burning up a yard full of railroad ties, chasing people off neutral land. And Governor Harney ended up calling in the army. And the army was here from, what was it? 1870 to 1840, something like that. 1869 to 1873. And he calmed them down. So, but that is a whole other episode, and there's just all kinds of drama, I guess you could call it. And what they did during that time is they tried anything they could to cancel the sale, including claiming it never belonged to the Cherokees to begin with. And they made up all these stories, some of them which are current today. You know, some people still repeat them, even though they're not true. What I found through my research is, you know, I find these statements in county histories, and then I try and find where they came from, the primary source. And I often found that they were totally unfounded, or like all good lies, there was a tiny bit of truth there, you know. So that was pretty interesting. Any questions? Now that I've bored you to death.
That well that I was talking about, I think it's on Union Street.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got a nice little cabin top, and it talks about Matthews, that the well was built by his slaves.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I have some maps. Anybody like maps? Guess I'll bore you a little more. What happened here? Oh. You've been spared, I think. Did it turn itself off? There we go. There we go.
Oh,
There we go. Okay. This is an interesting map here. It shows the Cherokee Reserve. Neutral land here is here. Osage Reserve is here. Oh, I should be pointing up here, huh? Below the Cherokees were the Quapaws, Senecas, and Shawnees. And more Senecas. Okay. What I find interesting about this map, this is 1837. Let's see, I gotta get this off. There we go. Mexican territory.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. It's something people don't realize very often, and you don't see that too often either. But yeah, that was Mexico right there. Okay. Well, there's Captain Sturgis as an admiral. I mean, as a general. Stern-looking guy. He fought in Indian wars also, and dealt with settlers, and was he was part of the Civil War. He fought battles out here in the West. And this is Colonel Lewis R. Jewell. He was an early Caddo settler, and he kind of led the resistance against the army when they came in to remove them. So he's kind of a hero up there. He died in the Civil War also. Well, the other one didn't. This one died in an action. There's a stern-looking fellow.
Yeah.
That's Secretary of Interior Thompson. He's the one who let the settlers in the Cato area stay, and he was a staunch Southerner. So as soon as the war started, he was gone. But yeah, look at those eyes. My God. And this is Stan Wattie. He was general in the Confederate. He was a Confederate general and a Cherokee principal chief during the Civil War. He went on to fight the last battle of the Civil War, of anybody. Yeah. Okay, I bored you to death. I'm sorry. I do have a book. We've been selling at Cato. Unfortunately, I don't have any copies. This is the first edition, and I'm coming out with the second edition, and we're trying to get rid of these, so I can put the other one out. So what I can do is if you either I give you my email or you give me yours, I'll send you a PDF of that book. Okay? And if you want a hard copy desperately enough, you can go. Cato Days is November 8th. We're going to have a cavalry charge, and hopefully we'll have a confrontation between the settlers and the cavalry. I've got pitchforks and the whole thing. Everybody always likes seeing them stick it to the man, right? So, like I said, I have an expanded edition of this book. You can look at it here, and I'll get a piece. Actually, you can put it on the back of this, your email, or I'll put my email at the top, and if you want to email me about it. Questions? Yes.
I was curious, I see Monmouth on the map. How large was Monmouth at one time?
I don't think it was very big. It wasn't actually there yet. I put it there because people later referred to some cabins being burned in that area. Yeah. This map is a composite. It's actually a best guess. There are no maps of the neutral land before it was sold. You didn't get surveys on Indian land until it was ready to be ceded to the government and opened up to settlers. So this is a composite of whatever I've found in documents like newspaper.com or the National Archives. If they mention something was there, or sometimes they'll mention the road and where it went, if you're lucky. There's 3 maps. Two of them are railroad maps, which aren't always that accurate, because the railroad, Joy later, almost immediately, sold it to, the Missouri River, Fort Scott, and Gulf Railroad. And that was a railroad that came through this way, I believe. So those were the 2 maps, and they showed. I think Ella has them here. I know you have one of them. Yeah. But the other map was the actual survey map of when they surveyed the land after it was ceded to the government. The government came in and surveyed it into sections. Yeah. And
What made you interested in it?
well, I'm actually I moved here from California a couple years ago, and I went into the museums here, and I saw mentioned the neutral land, and I saw what they said about the neutral land, and it just didn't sound right to me. And nobody seemed to want to do anything about it. You know, I mean, to investigate that period of history. Around here, the Civil War seems to just kind of suck the air out of everything. You know, so that period before the Civil War isn't really well known, and I think it's fascinating because it's about immigration, which is what basically all world history is about. You know, and a conflict between peoples, and it has it all. Yes.
So the fort that was at Baxter then, was that on the Cherokee neutral lands?
Actually, no. It was kind of on the edge, but there's a strip here. And this is the 37th parallel. That's the southern border of Kansas. Neutral land didn't go down that far. So there's a little gap about a mile down there.
Oh.
So that's actually what Baxter Springs is on.
And the government owned that little gap?
Yeah.
Huh.
Of course, it took them a while to figure that out. Yeah. Because, let me see, I can show you this map here. The northern-south borders, and actually east-west, well, north-south borders were determined by Chief Whitehair's village, which was actually here. This is an 1837 map. And so the northern border was, by treaty, 10 miles north, 40 miles south, for 50 miles. Well, as I mentioned, Calhoun, he looked at this map and saw Whitehair's village down here. So he goes, oh, it must be wrong. I'll move the border down 8 miles. But what either he didn't realize or he didn't care was what Chief Whitehair's village had moved. And this had been a dispute for a long time among historians. But I recently hired a researcher to obtain a map from me from the National Archives in Maryland, which shows exactly where Chief Whitehair's village was. So now, for the very first time in over 200 years, here's this map. And it shows Chief Whitehair's village, and it shows, traces it over to, oh, come on, let's go. Oh. I got lost it. There we go. The mile markers on the Missouri border. And that is right. And Chief Whitehair's village is just west of Shaw, Kansas, on the west bank of the Neosho River. And you can go there today. There's a hunting lodge there. Yeah. So people had argued. I don't think anybody had ever seen this map. And they had pretty much decided, yeah, it was Shaw. But there's the proof right there. So, yes.
There is a book at the county courthouse that shows the original surveys of Cherokee County.
Yeah.
And those bottom few miles that were just kind of no man's land are listed as being government lots.
Yeah, right. And it was also known as the government strip.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I found a, what was that, a deed or something for, it was a deed. It was a homestead deed. And I thought that was kind of unusual. I go, there's no homesteads in the neutral land. And then I looked up the township and range. There it was, right there in the government strip. Yeah. So there were homestead land in Cherokee County. Yeah.
That bottom line is about how far north of Oklahoma.
Oh, this here,
The dark line, the straight line.
this one here,
That one.
this, see that dash line? That's Oklahoma.
That's Oklahoma,
Yeah.
okay,
So it's about, I think it was something like 1.6 miles, something like that. Yeah. Not very big. But the reason it didn't go to the 37th parallel is because they used Chief Whitehair's village. You know, and it just didn't happen to go down there, you know. Oh, and you also, let me see on this map. Freepoint, anybody hear of Freepoint? That was the first county seat of Cherokee County. That was made during the territorial times. Of course, it didn't last. I don't think it lasted a whole year before the army came and chased everybody out. But they had officers, and of course, you know, the territorial time, you know, between 1854 and 1861, is a lot of what they did was questionable legally. And the documentation, I don't even know if it exists. You know, all these county things. So the counties during that time are a real mystery to me. Any other questions?
There's a lot of information.
yes.
It sure is, yeah.
It's good information.
And Osage Mission was a big part of the neutral land.
So was it in neutral land or just outside?
No, it was outside it was on the Osage Reserve, yeah. But people came and went, and, you know, the priests were pretty much the ones that stuck up for the Indians, besides the agents. It's always that pull between, you know, the settlers and the government and religion, and it's kind of, to me, it's kind of fascinating. And what you read in the county history is very, very simplified, but once you start digging into it, and most of this stuff is from the National Archives. I can't tell you how long I've spent transcribing documents, but it tells you a whole different story, because they are the only ones who recorded the history of the Indians in this area. And in many cases, it's far more complete than what we know about the settlers, which a lot of these settlers who were here before the removal, a lot of them came back. Probably most of them came back. But the ones that were here before 1860, and the ones you see compared to what you see in here, is probably less than 5% who managed to remain or come back from settlements when they settled in 1860 to after the war. So there was a massive turnover.
And we have all the records from the National Archives because this society raised $11,000 to get all that microfilm.
Right, and well, you have photocopies of most of them.
Yes, we
Yeah.
do.
And Ella, if you ever want to do some research, not only can do it here, but she has the links to the National Archives on the internet. So if you want to see the original documents. I mentioned John Lewis of Lewis and Clark. He was superintendent. You can go and see his documents and see his signature and everything. It's just really, to me, it's exciting. You know, it's just, wow, this is a real piece of history. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, that's Cool. Yeah. He was quite a guy. He was a real, almost all the railroads.
I remember when I first started, it was three of us.